Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope the sugar high is settling in. I want to thank you for inviting me here today to speak. I knew this would be perilous when I saw John Mitchell sitting at my table. I have had the misfortune of following him before. And John, I regard you as not only a very succinct and excellent economist, you are by far the most poetic. Can we all agree on that? As somebody who has a degree in economics, I can say most of the economics professors I had, watching them was like watching paint dry. And when I see John, I always wonder, where the heck was he? Well, thank you for having me here. I want to start right off the bat by saying my remarks are a little unusual today in the context of the discussion you've been having. You've been discussing some of the facts, the metrics, the market trends, the vision of the years ahead in terms of economic forecasts and what it means in terms of your business, your industry specifically. But I also want to go back a couple of years and remind ourselves where we were back in 2009, 2010, 2011. This is, as an industry, a group that was hard hit. You were hard hit, your employees were hard hit. A number of you personally probably experienced the loss of your assets. And so the good times you're experiencing today in terms of your underlying industry metrics came at a price, and I just want to acknowledge that I understand that. Second of all, I want to acknowledge that there's a number of people in this room that aren't from Oregon. A number of you have come across the river to Oregon. Thank you for being here. My remarks tend to focus on what's going on south of the river, but I think the trends that I'm discussing are completely relevant as they're regional in nature. And finally, I'm not an expert on owning or operating an apartment building. I've been a tenant before, if that qualifies for anything. And I've always been fortunate in that I've had good landlords who always treated me well and with respect. And in return, I treated them with respect. But what I wanted to talk about was sort of the political side of the equation, not so much the industry trends and the marketing, but I want to reflect back to you what I am hearing, not only as the state treasurer, but what I am hearing as a candidate in this city. And I think it's important for you to understand what's being said, because I think it'll help you as you discuss your approach in your role. As the state treasurer, I get asked about a lot of things, and I think we're going to have a Q&A later, and I'll probably get asked a lot of things then, but I get asked about issues from educational achievement to economic development, and I'm always happy to answer those questions. I certainly have strong opinions, and sometimes to my detriment, I'm more than happy to share those opinions. But many times, if the occasion warrants it, I'm also happy to share this opinion as well. None of our goals in the policy arena and none of our aims can be fully accomplished if we as elected leaders and we in positions of leadership in this community cannot provide the citizens of our community access to safe and affordable housing. I see it, and many other people in this community see it, as something fundamental. It's very important for a family to be able to have a secure home in order to be a thriving family. And I think we all know that. We understand that housing, while we're here today to talk about it as a business proposition for families, you of course know that your clients, the people who live in your buildings, that's their home base. That's their jumping off point to their place of employment so that they can support their family. It's the jumping off point for kids so that they could participate in the education system and have the same kind of opportunities that most of us in this room enjoyed. And it's where parents and kids can do the most important thing that a family can do, which is spend time together. So I would say just on a very philosophical level, that the security and the affordability in the existing of a stable home base is fundamental to the pursuit of happiness. And so here we find ourselves in a really interesting and dynamic period in history, in our community and regionally. And I think John did a fantastic job of sort of painting from a metrics perspective what those trends are and how dynamic and how much they've changed of late. But the reality is, I'm hearing in this midst of plenty, I'm hearing more and more concern about the change of pace and the change of dynamics in our community. And I'm sure this is not unique to Portland, Oregon. I, not more than 2 hours ago, met with a large group of people in the Overlook neighborhood, which is in North Portland. Maybe some of you are from that community. And there were people in the room. Some had been there 25 years in the neighborhood. Some had only been there a couple of years. All of them agreed that the changes they've seen just in the last 2 years in their neighborhood are gigantic. They have large apartment buildings being built in their neighborhood. They have a homeless tent encampment that the city is attempting to make a permanent living arrangement in the near vicinity. There's a lot of new people moving into the neighborhood. A lot of things are changing, and that raises a lot of questions. And I'd boil it down to this. As a candidate for mayor, the most common questions I get asked are, what are your top 3 priorities? You know, it's weird. Nobody ever asks me my top 4 priorities. It's always my top 3 or my top 5. What is it about the human brain that we don't have 4 or 6 priorities? I usually do. Or I'm asked, what's your 10-point plan to end homelessness, or your 10-point plan to encourage job growth and economic opportunity? Or I'm asked, alternatively, what are you going to do with your first 100 days in office? Those are very common questions if you're a candidate for anything. And they are important questions, and the answers to those questions get at the details of what kind of leader one might be, but it misses the fundamental question of leadership at a time of great change, such as this. You know, you heard John talk about people moving here, and we've heard about the statistics required in terms of new housing starts and the number of units that will need to be available. I don't know when 1 million new people will move to Portland, Oregon, but it's going to happen. We know it already. And it'll probably be in my lifetime that 1 million new people will move to the city of Portland. The fundamental question is this: how do we accommodate the expansion of our community by 1 million people and maintain the uniqueness and the livability that makes this community worth living in? That begs other big questions, some of which are directly relevant to you and your industry. How do we create a supply of housing, and housing that is affordable to people who aren't necessarily at the top of the economic spectrum, people who work for a living, people who are lower income, but the Oregonian, for example, profiled a guy who worked 60 to 80 hours a week at Subway to support his family. How do we ensure that as our community grows, we're able to support those opportunities? And what of education? And what of our ability to create a diverse economy with jobs and economic opportunity? And that begs the question of education and job training so that people can compete for the kinds of jobs that John laid out that are the growth opportunities in our community: innovation, technology, healthcare, advanced manufacturing. All of those require a level of education and job training, because we're moving closer and closer towards a skills-based economy and farther away from the days that most of us remember here in the state of Oregon, where you could graduate from Lebanon High School and then walk down the street to the plywood plant and qualify for a family-sustaining job. Then there's the question of infrastructure. For you guys, key infrastructure is probably stuff like roads and water and sewer. But it also begs questions of parks and recreational opportunities. And how are we going to be able to maintain the roads and the bridges that we have here in our community? Housing, I think, is going to be one of the core parts of this discussion. I want to briefly digress and talk to you about why this is important to me, and then I'm going to move right into the nuts and bolts. Before I was the state treasurer, before I was the county chair, and I think most of you have met me since those days, I actually had a life. I was gainfully employed in middle management. I guess I was technically in executive management at a local financial services firm. And I was looking for something else to do outside of work that did not involve women or alcohol. I was single then, by the way, in case my wife is here. And I was aware of the homelessness situation in our community. I wasn't keenly knowledgeable about it, but I was aware of it. And it struck me as a moral stain on our community that there were families with kids living on our streets. That just struck me as a non-starter. And a friend of mine introduced me to a mission-driven homeless shelter called the Goose Hollow Family Shelter. And I volunteered there for many years as an overnight volunteer shelter host. So I got to sleep on the floor of a gymnasium alongside parents and their kids. And while I could never claim to walk in their shoes, I certainly gained a deeper understanding and an empathy for how hard people struggle in our community, even during the best of times. And it shocked me that there were so many people then who were homeless as today. And now with the increases in the cost of living, particularly on the rent side, that's undoubtedly a great thing for an industry that for many years was struggling. The flip side to that is I'm hearing from more and more people who are lower income and even people who are in the middle class saying they're increasingly concerned about the rate of rent increases, and they're worried that at some point they might be priced out and moved out. That is a palpable fear, and I just want to share with you that not a day goes by when I do not hear somebody express that fear in very personal and very emphatic terms. It's important for you to know that, obviously, because of the political environment. I want you to consider something that Susan Anderson said. Most of you here probably know her. She's the head of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. She told the Metro Council not that long ago that we would need 123,000 new housing units in the city of Portland. It probably actually included larger than just the city of Portland over the next 20 years. Think about how many units that actually is. Some of the biggest apartment buildings going up in this city hold what, 250-ish units somewhere, give or take. 123,000 units. So that begs a lot of questions. But she went on to express her concern that even with additional housing stock, and even if we meet those criteria, the cost of that housing will displace a lot of the people who are here today. And so while there'll still be a lot of people coming here and there'll still be a lot of people paying the rent, the concern is that a lot of people who are in the community today will find themselves moved out. And this is a legitimate concern. And John's commentary, I think, says it all. Rents have effectively gone up 50% over the last 5 years, and wages haven't even come close to keeping pace with that. There are people moving here who will pay $1,800 or $1,900 a month for a one-bedroom apartment, but for a lot of the people who are here and already employed and already part of the community and have their kids already engaged in a school, they're finding that they are being displaced in favor of others who can actually afford that. And it leads me to ponder, what kind of community does that leave us with if we just let the status quo unroll based on the forecasts that we've all seen and we all assume to be accurate? We are not a monolithic community. We're not a homogeneous community. And as I get out there and I sort of hear various themes on Keep Portland Weird, it's obvious to me people don't want us to be a homogeneous or monolithic community, and we have reason to worry. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, everybody wanted to be like San Francisco. Do you remember that? They had all the high-tech and innovation-based jobs, all the high-wage jobs. They were spinning off business after business. The universities down there were on fire in terms of the number of people who wanted to be part of the technology boom. And we all thought, wow, this is a great thing. But what we didn't see coming, or at least what most of us didn't see coming to the degree that we now understand it, is San Francisco was slowly losing its mojo. Economically, it is still on fire, but it's a city where the middle class has been hollowed out. It has become a city of haves and have-nots. And a lot of the things that made it funky and interesting and culturally diverse and artistic and wonderful and bohemian and international are now leaving. They're being priced out of the city. That is a concern to me from a distance, but it's even more of a concern to the people who live there. And in fact, I've heard somebody say, we don't want San Francisco just to become a wholly owned subsidiary of Google. And that's funny on one hand. On the other hand, there is some animosity growing. I don't know if anybody here is from San Francisco, but the Google bus, which by the way does not have the name of Google anywhere on it, people are throwing rocks at it as it drives through the neighborhood to pick up people to take it to the Google headquarters. People are not happy. So we have to call out what happened. We have to name the problem. It's a twofold problem. Here today, we're really talking about supply. There's also a demand issue, and I'm going to get to that briefly, and then I'll shut up. We have a gross John's sitting here going, duh. We have a gross misconnect here between supply and demand in terms of people who are already located here today. Lots of people moving here. As John mentioned, we're the #1 destination in the country, I think, for like the third year in a row. People want to be here for all the right reasons. It's a great community, but the reality, unfortunately, is that we're not able to keep up with the supply that's required. And I loved your statistic about housing units per permit. I think that's a fascinating statistic, and I'd like to push that a little further. So what are we going to do about it? And what's being discussed? Here's the political framework writ large very quickly in a minute and a half or less. These are all the issues that I'm aware of that are on the table that impact your industry, that will be discussed in the legislative session in February and will be discussed elsewhere around the region and around the state. First of all, there's a demand to expand market tools that are available. To put it in purely political terms, to capture back public benefit from the private market. What do I mean about that? As profits grow in a private sector market, there's naturally an interest on the part of, and I'll just say government, with small g government, to see if there isn't a way to capture back some of that private sector profitability and put it to public good. And you see that in a myriad of ways, system development charges to support infrastructure. The main issue being discussed in Salem, of course, is IZ, inclusionary zoning. And I think you all know what it is, but just for if there's somebody here who doesn't, oversimplifying it, it means that as developers get permits to develop market rate housing, they are also required to provide a certain number of affordable units. And affordability, just let's acknowledge affordability means different things in different contexts. I'm talking generically. But so it is what I would say is a regulatory mandate approach. Portland is one of, I believe, 2 communities its size in the United States that does not have inclusionary zoning. So it's a tool very much being considered and looked at as a means of increasing the supply of affordable housing in the city of Portland. There are alternative market tools that are available. Perhaps a better strategy is one that I would call an incentive-based approach, where government, again, small g, works with private sector housing developers and identifies ways that the housing developer could be incentivized to provide more affordable units, either by changing some of the permitting requirements, reducing limitations on height, through tax abatements or fee reductions. There's a number of different ways that could look. I'm very interested in some of the work that Commissioner Dan Saltzman has done here in the city of Portland on some of the projects that he's worked on here as the housing commissioner. I know there's representatives here today from Key, and Tom Brennicke's here from Guardian. They came together and created 56 units of affordable on 57. I was off by one. That's pretty good for me. That's within the margin of error. 57 units of affordable housing, and that was a mutually agreed upon incentive-based approach. And I think that experiment is worth continuing to pursue and see where we can go with that. Particularly given that inclusionary zoning did not pass in legislative session last time around. I have no idea what its prospects are this time around. Increasing funding. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but obviously government has an important role to play in terms of developing, particularly on the affordable side. It has an important role to play in rehabbing, particularly public facilities that could be repurposed. There's an opportunity for revolving loan funds, land banking, rent assistance. Those are historically programs that go through government. There will be a push to increase funding for all of the above. And I think many of those tools are extremely effective, and I would most certainly be supportive. Then there's what I would describe as the policy side at the city level. The city needs to evaluate, and this is true of all cities, and it gets to John's interesting statistic about permits issued per whatever it was, per new resident. Thank you, John. We have a process of permitting and fees and inspections that I would describe as highly imperfect here in the city of Portland. I'm going to give you two quick stories. Story number one. I know a developer who has been trying to get housing into the market, including a significant affordable housing component. He has now spent a year in the design review process with his team of architects and designers and engineers and other people who charge a lot of money by the hour, and has now spent over $100,000 on the design review process and is still not to the permit. That's thing number one that suggests the process could be streamlined, the red tape could be reduced, and the subjectivity could be limited. Number two, I know a purely affordable housing developer, somebody who develops at about the 40% MFI or lower, who has a lot that is already legally dividable and buildable for 2 affordable housing units. And they have actually made it through design review. They actually have their permit, but contingent upon that permit being used are $80,000 in additional transportation charges from the Bureau of Transportation that wants them to rebuild an entire cul-de-sac, widen a street, put in sidewalks, put in curb cuts, and lighting. And while that is a laudable goal, I do not understand why the city is penalizing affordable housing and the people who need those housing units for the city's 3-decade mismanagement of our city's transportation infrastructure. They are unrelated issues. And to put it, we all know these are pass-through costs. It's not on you. To put this on the backs of the working poor in our community is unconscionable. It's bad policy, it's stupid, and it's unconscionable, and it should be brought to an end. Then there's these, we've been talking about supply side here. There's also demand side issues. Let's not forget, part of the problem here is that displacement results from people's wages not going up as quickly as the supply. So they're being displaced by other people who move here who can afford those units. So my question is, what are we doing for the people on the demand side to help them improve their economic situation so that they are not priced out of the market? It's very important to me. The discussion around the minimum wage is white hot. I want you to know I have long been a proponent of an increase in the minimum wage. We can debate that later if you want. But even at $15 an hour, the fact is you qualify for about 40% MFI. You still need subsidies in order to be able to live in Portland, Oregon, even at a $15 an hour minimum wage. So let's be realistic. What we really need to talk about is how do you get people to $25, $35, and $50 an hour, and the only answer that we have is through improved education and job training. Skill people up. That's an important factor going forward. It's something I'm going to continue to hammer away at. Last but not least, renter protections. And I know this is anathema to this group, and it's probably a terrible thing to bring up after dessert. I'm sure it's not considered polite. But I'm going to bring it up because you're going to hear about it, and this is going to be an issue hotly debated in Salem, and there are a lot of people who feel very strongly about this. I think it's pretty well known in this room that I do not believe rent control is the best solution. I've lived in rent-controlled cities. I've looked at the information. Rent control is great if you are in a rent-controlled apartment. It has highly distortive effects on the rest of the market and, in fact, increases the cost for other lower-income people who are not in a rent-controlled situation. I liken it to a balloon. You squeeze it in one place, it's great, except it pops out somewhere else. But there are other things that I would like you as apartment owners and developers to think about and ask yourselves, is there a common sense middle ground to be found around notification or around limiting rent increases for your long-term tenants who have been good tenants and have acted in good faith and taken care of the property that you own and maintain? Are there other ways that we can protect the interests of people who are currently here, working here, who want to live here, who want to participate in the community? I'm going to close with this. What you do is a complex business. And again, I applaud you. You guys take a lot of risk to be in any way involved in real estate. I understand that. It's very tough being a landlord. It is not an easy call of duty. But whether you like it or not, housing is a hot-button political issue because that displacement has impacts not only for the family, not only for their economic prospects and the overall economy, it also impacts community institutions. Schools, for example, if kids are mobile, we know it harms their academic outcomes. And think about the San Francisco example, what people being displaced does for institutions like churches or cultural institutions or artistic institutions or other community organizations. As people move, those institutions are disrupted. You guys have a big role to play in helping us find the way. Help those of us who are in elective leadership, who are not necessarily experts in your industry, to find good, common sense solutions that can help us address some of these issues around housing affordability. Help us find a way to get more supply on the market. Help us to find partnerships that make good common sense. I thank you for having me here. And I think at some point John and I get questions. Please ask John. He's much smarter than I am. I will thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.